welcome to this episode of Frontrunner 2020. I'm Ron Turner.
And the last thing I would say then, after the sort of what's your brand, what makes you compelling, what do you stand for, is the marketing piece. How are people going to find out about you? And this is something that we experience oftentimes, where people, think I'm doing all this great work, I'm really qualified. Of course, people will vote for me. Well, sure, but they don't know where to reach you, or they haven't had a chance to experience your story yet. So I would encourage you to tackle the same sort of planning piece that an organization does, right? You do a little market research. You're going to want to figure out both, how you're showing up online and offline. Now, for the online piece, it's a lot of times you can get good advice on this, and you probably know a lot of it. Check your Facebook page. Are you creating a fan page? Are you on Twitter? What other social networking sites are you on? Do you have a website? These are things that people get. But also be thinking online a little bit about, do I write the same way on a listserv as I would on my campaign brochures? And thinking about, is my Twitter feed that's potentially maybe private, would I be upset if that became public? Again, it's that divide between internal and external. And then, of course, be thinking actively about how are people going to find out about you offline? As we'll continue, you'll see, driving to the fact that relationships are the most compelling and a key component of the work. Think about how you're going to be showing up through civic engagement, how you're going to be showing up, in your neighborhood, at your church, and be thinking about consciously planning, how do I make sure that the things I stand for are showing up, I'm letting people externally see how I show the things I stand for. And Ron, I think y'all talk more about this in episode 6.
Yeah, that's right. Next week, we have David Smith speaking about civic engagement. He's a former Plano City Council member, and he has a well-organized presentation about how you participate in your community in the actual real physical world.
So don't forget about the offline engagement, and it is as important, if not more, than some of the online work that you're doing. So I'd give you a little homework in this regard. Take a moment and write what you stand for. It should be just like your brand. You should be able to say it simply and succinctly. Then do a little exercise about where you ask your friends to think, ask your friends what your friends think is compelling about you. So the idea here is that you're doing a little just market research, and when you get some honest feedback, and then that gives you the tools to say, am I showing up how I want to show up? And if you're not, then just like an organization would engage in a marketing plan or some sort of a strategic planning process, you have the tools to do the same thing.
Hey, John?
Yeah.
Since we've been talking about this over the course of the week, just today something else occurred to me that, in the classic book by Stephen J. Covey, The 7 Habits, one of the exercises he recommends is, in a way, sort of morbid, but it's imagining your own funeral and what people would say about you. That's kind of another way, too, is if you're honest with yourself, sometimes, the good things will come out that kind of like, wow, this is what they're saying about me, and I didn't fully appreciate that strength, and I want to more fully express it. Let's look at a positive potential outcome, because there's other things that could happen in that exercise as well. But anyway, I just kind of wanted to throw that in there. It's another way of looking at this.
Yeah, I think you just said in human nature, right? Sometimes it's our nature to focus on the negative. When the truth is, I love that exercise about what would they say at your funeral, and that's probably people being the most generous towards you as well. So don't forget those strengths that you have.
Exactly, that's the point.
Let's talk about your value. So the first thing is, I think a lot of people do this when they're thinking about running for office. What's your track record of success? And, I'm sure you have a great resume, and if you've done that analysis and probably already thought, I should get a little more experience here, a little more experience doing that, you'll be great. But you think beyond just that sort of like, what's my resume say? But am I providing people a really great user experience so they know when I'm inviting them to an event or I'm inviting them to for whatever the activity, that they know that because it's coming from you, it's going to be of quality, which then lets you, I think, ask one of the most important questions that any organizer or campaigner should apply to what their task at hand, which is the why is what you are doing better than watching TV or drinking test. You know, we see this all the time. People think, well, it's an important issue, or I really care about it. But, you know, the truth is that we're the type of people that are on a webinar or, you know, thinking about jumping into one of to public service, which enjoys some of the lowest approval ratings out there in America. And, you know, the truth is that if you're thinking about what's that user experience, how am I going to make sure people who engage with me are getting a really valuable, high-quality product, then you should be able to give a compelling answer to why what you're doing is better than watching TV or drinking. And if you find yourself in a situation where you can't quite figure out what the answer is, then you might want to think about evaluating that activity, the value of it. Should we continue doing it? Is this the type of thing that I want to extend to other people? You know, it's worked for me in the past, and it also then helps you assess things that you say, that was close, but I might have rather watched that episode of, I don't know, American Idol or something. Then you have a way to improve for next time. But, you know, as with the last time, the what and the whys, it's important to think about the how. So ask yourself then, once you find these compelling events, how can people support you? So you want to make sure that you're providing clear relationship building opportunities or activities along the way that invites more people into the work you're doing, that can showcase your value. So you need to be thinking strategically about that. So, you know, my homework suggestion here would be list 5 ways you can consciously invite people to join you in your life. That's not really a question. That should be a statement. But the point is that, you know, I take the minute to actually say, if I wanted to figure out how to showcase the value of what I'm doing, what are the top 5 ways I could do that? And I think that's what this is trying to get to.
Yeah, and one of the things we talked about in preparation for this is strategically, what are the types of people you want to know as well? That is, you want balanced, and again, not to be a people user, but you want a diversity in many dimensions.
Absolutely, which is kind of the last point that we're talking about here. So thinking about your human resources and your relationships. You know, the first question I want you to start thinking about on a regular basis is, how will you nurture your relationships? You know, I actually knew a guy who every day would think about, I want to talk to 100 people, and would start a list of people he wanted to talk to and then people he had the opportunity to talk to throughout the day. And then he would track that and think about it over time. You maybe don't need to go to that level of detail, but it does take a moment to stop and say, there's a difference between you know, just making a contact, but thinking actively, what does this relationship need to become stronger? Is it more frequent contact? Is it more personal contact? Is it the sharing of a personal experience? And being conscious about identifying and developing those relationships. Then this translates into the question about, how do you treat your supporters? So thinking a little bit about in addition to the friends and relationships you already have, there's actually another tier out there, you know, of people that support you that you may not even know. And so how are you being gracious online, out in public, And then, of course, the friends of friends or your friends. You know, I'm thinking back probably to episode 3 where we started talking about those concentric circles of fundraising. You know, the same thing is true of supporters. And you need to take a minute and actively say, how am I going to treat those people that maybe aren't that more at the acquaintance level as opposed to a friend level? The third thing I'd say, and this is something Ron was just touching on, how are you going to avoid transactional relationships? It becomes really easy as we're building our organizational plans, right, your strategic plan for you, to start thinking about, here's a bunch of tasks I need to check off, and so I need to talk to them because they will be good for X. And the truth is, that probably is not the values that you brought that are calling you to do this work in the first place. And more importantly, you never want to be in a situation where someone else views your relationship as transactional. You get into the problems when it becomes an eye for an eye, a tit for tat. Like that's just something that you should avoid when you're in politics, and you have the ability to avoid. And by thinking about it now and building up you as an organization in your departments, then you can flag for yourself down the road potential problems and note, it's much better to find out that that person is transactional and they expected an immediate invite to the party you were hosting because they invited you to the party they were hosting, than to find out that after they try to give you a large campaign contribution.
I like that point, John. I'm glad you've included it because it kind of goes to the core of what I believe personally. I always think in the outgoing direction is that you want to live generously without keeping a balance sheet of expectations. But what you've made me more aware of is being sensitive to situations where you encounter other people who are keeping that sort of balance sheet and kind of, raising a flag when you find that.
Absolutely. The last two things, I'll just put them up together, which seems a little odd, but right, like one is how are you developing specialized volunteers or members, and then the last one is how are you building leadership, especially in this case among your friends, supporters, or members, if we're continuing the organizational parallel. And the reason I say this is twofold. One is that you clearly are laying the foundation for developing relationships with people you trust to move you forward, and you want to be able to count on some of these people as you're moving into a campaign setting. And the great thing is if you're being authentic in nurturing these relationships and figuring out what are their passions and how can you be helpful to the things they're doing, you might find that you're actually along the way developing specialized volunteers. So you find out the person that loves the admin piece or the person that loves talking to more people, and you know that because you've seen them show up in a genuine way over time, based on your relationship with them. And at the same time, you're building that leadership and that trust with them. So as your campaigns become bigger, you have both an emotional bank to draw on, but also you've given them plenty of opportunities to hand over big pieces of you and important things in your life. It's making it a lot easier to hand over big portions of your campaign, and allowing you to develop that relationship to delegate and trust. And as your campaign gets bigger, you're going to need to do more and more of that. But by being thoughtful now, and thinking about your relationships, your members, your human resources here, you're going to set yourself up for both, more long-term success in your campaign, but also just a better quality of life because you're being more authentic and thoughtful with the people around you.